What's up guys, welcome to the Chess Giant. This is Solomon Riddell, and in today's video we're going to be covering the Benoni Defense, one of the strongest and most dangerous chess openings for black against the move d4, in which we're going to start off with knight f6 and against c4 play the somewhat off-key looking move c5. I absolutely love this idea for black, using a flank pawn to directly fight for the center of the board. I mean, if a move like knight f3 is played, we're simply going to trade our flank pawn for a center pawn, continue to naturally develop our pieces, take our opponent out of their preparation, and we're going to have a very smooth and easy middle game. I think here the best move for white, and it's not even close, is d5. But I mean, let's answer the obvious question, guys. What happens if white just takes the pawn on c5? I mean, it appears to be a free pawn. Why not just take it? Well, this actually turns out to be a pretty big mistake, because we now have e6, looking to take this pawn back with tempo, potentially putting pressure on the very vulnerable pawn on f2. White could play a move like bishop e3, trying to hold on to it, but then we just play knight a6, attacking that pawn. We're going to take that pawn off the board, and white is going to have a very cramped and uncomfortable position. A move like b4 may make it seem like white is successfully holding onto that pawn, but guys, in this position, we cannot play passive chess. We can't just sit around and admit that we're down a pawn and play moves like h6 or bishop e7. We have to go after this pawn chain right away with the move a5. And notice how a3 can't really be played, because we're simply going to take that pawn on b4, and if a takes b4, thank you for the rook on a1. After a move like b takes a5, it's true. I mean, white is temporarily up 2 pawns, but let's be honest, we can take either of these pawns literally whenever we want to with tempo. And actually, in this position, I think the best move for black is knight e4, centralizing this minor piece and really threatening to play queen f6, which actually traps the rook on a1 and threatens a mate in 1 on f2. If white sees this and plays a move like bishop e3, protecting the pawn on f2, we can now just play queen takes a5 with check, and after knight d2, play knight a6. I mean, usually, guys, we don't want to bring our knight to the edge of the board, but our knight on a6 is really attacking both c5 and eyeing the square on b4. A move like bishop takes c5 will probably be our next option, and if you look at this position from the white perspective, they have a very awkward and uncomfortable position. They have an isolated pawn on a2, double isolated pawns on the c-file, a very awkward bishop on e3 that is really limiting the development of the rest of white's pieces, and on top of that, this knight on d2 can't even move. I don't think any d4 player is looking for a position like this at move 7 in the game. So guys, as tempting as taking this pawn is, it's simply a big mistake, because we play e6 looking to take that pawn with tempo, and b4 only digs white into a deeper hole because of the move a5. Let's now cover the main option for white with d5. And actually for black, we do have quite a few different variations. We could play moves like d6 or g6, or even the Benko Gambit with b5. But in today's video, I'm going to be showing you my personal favorite variation, and actually the main line, with the modern variation of e6 directly putting pressure on that pawn on d5. And yet again, white has a pretty big decision to make. I mean, if white hasn't ever seen this position before, it's very easy to fall into trouble. For example, if the move d6 is played, this may seem to really cramp our position, getting eye of both e7 and c7, but against this, we can simply play queen b6, winning a pawn, because we're attacking both the pawn on d6 and the pawn on b2, and white simply can't hold on to both. If a move like d takes e6, we're not going to take with our d pawn because of queen takes d8 with check, but take towards the center of the board with f takes e6. And really, no matter what white plays the next move, let's say white plays something like g3, we're going to break through in the center of the board with d5. If c takes d5, queen takes d5 is a very good option. And if any other move here, like bishop g2, we're going to continue to push down the board with d4. Once this dark squared bishop gets into the game, we can always trade it off with a move like bishop d6, continue to play natural developmental chess with castling kingside, knight c6, advance with c5, and this is a very comfortable position for black. I mean, we have a huge space advantage right in the center of the board, a rook that is on a very active semi-open file, a solid knight pair, a solid queen on d6, and a bishop on c8 that really does have a ton of different options, because the pawns are the opposite color of our bishop. This is a very strong position for black, and I would take this position for black every single time. So guys, really doing anything with this pawn, pushing it to d6 or taking the pawn on e6 are pretty big mistakes for white. I think the best option for white is to simply leave this pawn on d5 and play a move like knight c3, e3, knight f3, g3. There's a ton of different options here. In today's video, we're going to cover the main line of knight c3, but really no matter what white plays, our plan remains the same. We're going to take that pawn off of d5, and then we're going to immediately play the move d6. This is the pawn structure that we're looking for in the Benoni defense, really getting a grip on the dark squares right in the center of the board. And after this, let's say a move like knight f3 is played, we could play bishop e7, but this bishop on e7 would be a tall pawn as it could barely even move. Why not fianchetto it with the move g6, play bishop g7, and really reinforce these center squares of e5 all the way down to c3. Following a move like h3, white may play this with the New York variation, trying to get rid of that g4 square from both our knight and our bishop, but it turns out that black is completely fine. We're simply going to castle kingside here, and after a move like bishop d3, we could play a very quiet game with moves like a6 and knight d7 and queen e7, and if you want to play like this, that is actually completely fine. But the main line here, and my personal favorite move, is b5. This looks absolutely crazy, but it's been played at the success of many Grandmaster players. Really with this move, what we're trying to do is play the move b4, attacking this knight on c3, and again, continuing to absolutely dominate the dark squares in this game. And on top of that, this knight on c3 is a key defender on that pawn on e4. So if we're able to get b4 in, we have to get that move in. I mean, attacking that knight, playing rook e8, teaming up on that pawn. I really like black's game there. So 9 times out of 10, maybe even 99 times out of 100, you're going to see white take this pawn. The big question is, are they going to take with the bishop, or are they going to take with the knight? Let's first cover the move bishop takes b5. The key move against bishop takes b5 is knight takes e4. Beautiful idea. Notice with our knight on e4 and our bishop on g7, we're putting a ton of pressure on that knight on c3. I mean, really in this position, taking that knight is forced, but now we are currently down a piece, but we're getting that piece right back with queen a5 check, attacking both the king and the misplaced bishop on b5. Remember how we played the move b5 and this bishop took it? Because the bishop took, we were able to take off that center pawn, play queen a5, and win that piece back. Now in this position, the best move for white is knight fd2. White could play a move like bishop d2, but I really think it's in white's best interest to keep that bishop on c1 and defend that pawn on b2. After this, we're simply going to continue with queen takes b5, slicing down on e2 and f1, not allowing white to castle. And in this position, it's very easy for white to fall into trouble. I mean, we have a very active queen, a very active bishop on g7, and really the only move here for white is taking that pawn on d6. Now, I know some of you are probably wondering, wait a second, we're simply down a pawn, and now white has a pass pawn on d5. And honestly, when I first saw this opening, I thought the exact same thing. But as y'all are going to see, black has very active pieces, an advantage in development, and it's really going to be impossible for white to hold on to both b2 and d5 forever. For example, in this position, we could play a move like queen a6, attacking that knight. And if white wants to play something like knight 2 c4, defending the knight and also looking to castle kingside, that's completely okay. We're going to play knight d7 followed by knight e5. And notice how both our knight and our queen are teaming up on that knight on c4. We're actually threatening to just win a piece here. If a move like knight takes c8, we're going to take back with our rook. And now after knight takes e5, we're going to take back with our bishop. Now notice in this position, white may be a little bit careful to move this bishop because they would simply lose the pawn on b2. If a move like rook e1, a very common looking move, I mean just bringing this rook to the open file, we can now swing our queen to the very aggressive f6 square, forming a battery ram on this diagonal, really teaming up on this pawn. And I actually think one of the biggest mistakes white can make here in this position is trying to hold on to the pawn. For example, if a move like queen c2, we can now just play rook fd8, attacking the pawn on d5. And if rook d1, because of our pawn on c5, we have bishop d4 available. We're about to take that pawn on d5. If white sees this and plays a move like queen b3, trying to defend both b2 and d5, don't forget we're also attacking f2. There's simply so many weaknesses here for white. 2 of white's pieces haven't even moved, and all of our pieces are extremely active. I really like black's game here. So guys, going back to this position after the crazy looking move b5 against bishop takes pawn, we have knight takes e4, followed by queen a5 check, winning that bishop right back. What about the move knight takes b5? Well, in this position, we're going to continue with rook e8, simply ganging up on that pawn on e4. And actually in this position, we have two threats, winning the pawn on e4 and winning the pawn on d5, because this e-pawn can't take it since it's pinned to the king on e8. White may play a move like knight c3, trying to hold on to both, and we're going to go over that later on in this video. But let's first cover the main line of castling kingside. I'm going to be showing you the most popular moves for white at the master and grandmaster level, and at the end, black still has an even game. Notice how white could play moves just to move back, like something like knight c3 or queen c2, and lose the game extremely quickly. I mean, this is a very hard position to play with as white, but let's first cover the best options so that you're prepared for whatever comes your way. Following castling kingside, we're going to continue by taking that pawn on e4, evening out the material, and against the move rook e1, we're not going to bring our knight back right away, but instead play the move a6, attacking that knight, kicking it back to a3, and then once this knight is in a more passive position, not attacking our pawn on d6, we can bring it back to f6, and after rook takes e8, take back with our knight. This move may seem kind of strange, but I actually kind of like it for black, and a ton of grandmasters play it. Taking back with this knight really does get a grip and defends that pawn on d6, which is key in this position because really the d6 pawn is our base, really fighting for the center of the board, and on top of that, our bishop on g7 becomes alive, really making this bishop a prisoner. And really in this position, white's best option is not staying a prisoner, but playing the move bishop g5, attacking our queen, in which case we're simply fine. Keep in mind, guys, this is the main line. White is playing as good as they can, and I've plugged this into a computer program, and the game is simply even. I mean, following a move like queen a4, we can play knight f6. After rook e1, play bishop b7. Notice how we're really putting a ton of pressure on that d5 pawn. If white tries to minimize this pressure by taking off our minor piece, we'll simply take back with our bishop, and after a move like queen f4, attacking our bishop on f6, we can simply play knight d7. And I must admit, I mean, in this position, guys, following the main line, white playing near perfect for 19 straight moves, our pawn on d6 is pretty weak. But in return, white's pawns on d5 and b2 are very weak. I mean, white could play a move like knight c4, but then we just take the pawn on d5, and we're actually going to end up with even material. If you plug this into a computer program, it's going to tell you that it's a dead even position if white plays perfectly right here, and if white doesn't play the right move of knight c4, black is simply better. I would take black here every single time, both because I don't really think white has any advantage, and on top of that, I think it's just a much easier position to play with as the black pieces. Now guys, going back to this position, I showed you the main line of castling kingside with white playing perfectly for 9 straight moves in which we still had an even game. What if white slightly messes up here and plays the move knight c3? I mean, me personally, if I've never studied the opening theory before, I would probably play knight c3 in an instant, stopping both knight takes e4 and knight takes d5. But it turns out that knight c3 actually doesn't stop knight takes e4, as we're gonna play it anyways. The whole idea here is that following a move like bishop takes e4, we can play bishop takes c3 check, take that bishop on e4, and we have ourselves a very nice game. And if knight takes e4, we can now play f5. Here in this position, white could play a move like castling kingside, which they'd really love to do. I mean, getting this king to safety, but the issue is that they simply don't have time. We would take that knight on e4, evening out the material, and then forking both the knight on f3 and the bishop on d3. So you may see a move like knight g5, but against this, we're simply going to play f takes e4. If knight takes e4, we simply have bishop f5 continuing to mount the pressure. And if bishop takes e4, I really like this idea of bishop takes b2. What a move. Our bishop becoming alive and really distracting this bishop on c1. The whole purpose is that if bishop takes b2, the bishop is no longer defending that knight on g5, and we can simply take it off the board. And if white finds the move of knight e6, we can simply continue with queen h4, continuing to pour the pressure on white. After a move like queen c2, barely holding this position together, we can simply take on c1 and then continue with taking on e6. I mean, in this position, following rook takes e6, both our rook and our queen attack that centralized bishop. This bishop may look very active as bishop d5 and bishop takes a8 ideas are in the air, but as y'all can see, this bishop simply can't move, and white can't defend the bishop anymore because this pawn on f2 is also pinned because of our queen on h4. So in this position, following a move like castling kingside, we're going to take on e4. We're simply up 4 points of material, and I would take black here every single time without question. If you'd like to learn more on the theory behind the old Benoni defense, click the video to the left. If you'd like to learn more on the theory behind the French defense, a strong response against e4, click the video to the right. Leave a comment to let me know other videos you'd like to see covered on this channel. And as always, I appreciate you guys. Thanks for watching. Peace.